Hi, I'm Spencer Redford, and my presentation explores some of the fundamental principles regarding company culture. Company culture is fascinating, and history has given us a multitude of examples of both company success stories and failures. Not because of bottom line profits, but because of culture within the organization. While some companies maintain a consistent culture from the very formation of the company, others must adapt as they grow and expand, which creates new challenges. Now let's look at the organizational cultural changes. The father of modern management, Peter Drucker, concluded that we are in one of those great historical periods that occur every 200 or 300 years when people don't understand the world anymore, and the past is not sufficient to explain the future. End quote. Indeed, the world is speeding up, and culture that worked during the industrial age may not necessarily translate into good culture for the modern communications and internet age. There is a lot of uncertainty about the future, especially as economic conditions deteriorate in Western societies. There are new challenges and opportunities that come from globalization that present conflicts between corporate heads and those in the field. Now, I want to explore some of the cultural changes and principles in four very large companies. But first, I want to briefly review what we learned from the Home Depot case and use it as a platform for exploring Apple, Zappos, Google, and JCPenney. And then after we explore the cultural differences in those companies, I want to highlight some of the defining issues and takeaway principles. So now, Home Depot is a fabulous example of a company that has kept pace with both modern advances and changes that necessarily come as a company expands. What got Home Depot from 0 to 50 billion in sales wasn't going to get it to the next 50 billion, as the case study said. They recognized early on that their financial and business model was a culture that worked from the beginning, but wouldn't necessarily be sustainable in the future. They brought in Robert Nardelli as pictured, who made drastic changes to the free-form culture that existed. He instituted strict accountability standards and employed metrics to determine cultural priorities rather than let local managers do things based on intuition. It was enormously successful, even though it was initially met by opposition even from within the company. Change is hard. Okay, let's look at cultural types. First, in the upper left hand, we have culture that's called clan, with quality strategies such as empowerment, team building, and employee involvement. Notice that on this compass, the quadrant features flexibility and internal focus on the top left. And an adhocracy on the top right is both flexible but with an external focus, with quality strategies such as standards, continuous improvement, and finding creative solutions. Now on the bottom, companies are more focused on stability and control. On the bottom left, we have a hierarchy where the focus is on error detection, measurements, and process control. And then on the bottom right, we have a more market-based company that is externally focused, and their concerns are customer preferences and improving productivity. So now let's take a look at how that applies to Apple. The high degree of emphasis in the adhocracy quadrant was one of the dominant features for Apple at the beginning of the company, and that's shown in Profile 1. And as you remember, adhocracy is in the top right. Within a few years of incorporation, Apple established one of the most successful ventures ever. The team's endeavors were so successful that the entire organization adopted the team culture and came to look like Profile 2, a highly cohesive clan. And this is shown by the fact that employees wore Apple logos in their clothes and had bumper stickers on their cars. As the company expanded with the emergence of a large array of highly competitive rivals, politics and regulations were needed, and that created more of a hierarchy, as shown in Profile 3. And the employees did not like it at all. John Scully was brought in, and he moved it to more of a Profile 4. Now, one reason Apple struggled during that era was because it continued to emphasize culture in the bottom two quadrants. The genius of Steve Jobs was that he was able to bring the company into the 21st century by making the company feel like a clan with that entrepreneurial spirit, but it was governed by sound policies that weren't necessarily hierarchical, but it worked for the large company. Let's move on to Zappos. Here's a video, short 1-minute video of the Zappos CEO talking about how important company culture is.
Yeah, so from the outside, the first company, Linked that I co-founded, seemed like a success. It was actually a pretty sad thing selling the company. Most people actually don't know the reason why we ended up selling the company. It's because the company culture just went completely downhill. I remember when it was just 5 or 10 of us, it was kind of like your typical .com back in the day. This was 1996, and we were working around the clock, sleeping under a desk, had no idea what day of the week it was, but it was a lot of fun. But we didn't know any better to pay attention to company culture. So by the time we got to 100 people, we hired all the people with the right skill sets and experiences, but not all of them were culture fits. And when we got to 100 people, I remember I myself dreaded getting out of bed in the morning to go to the office, and that was kind of a weird feeling because this was a company I co-founded, and if I felt that way, I wondered how all the other employees must have felt.
Okay, so he talks about if he, as the CEO, doesn't feel like going to work, then surely his employees wouldn't. So the CEO has such an important role in determining company culture. So let's look at Google. Google has always said that it forgoes a corporate culture in which success depends on performance. Google essentially rewrote social contracts with employees and established a culture fit for a technology company in the 21st century. Google portrays itself as a special place with programs and perks for employees that are extremely generous. There are meals of all kinds prepared by in-house chefs. There are laundry services, children's daycare, doctors, and seemingly endless amenities. One of the most defining cultural standards is allowing the company's engineers to have 20% of their time to pursue their own ideas instead of just working on company assignments. Other companies have taken note and have realized that a company culture where the employees feel empowered pays huge dividends. Then finally we have JCPenney. And quickly, I'll just share that Mike Ullman was the original CEO, and the company was continually losing market share. So they brought in Ron Johnson, who originally worked for Target and Apple. But his policies that worked in Apple and Target did not work at JCPenney, and there were huge problems and resentment from a lot of the employees. And then on top of that, a culture change can happen by external events, like JCPenney brought in Ellen DeGeneres to have an ad campaign, and it received a huge backlash from a lot of Christians who didn't approve of that. So one little thing can go wrong, and it can change the company culture. Okay, so here are some of the challenges and principles that companies face. Number one, internationalization and regional identity. There are potential challenges between cultural influences from outside the region and regional cultures. Number two, competition and cooperation. This field of interactions concerns the potential tensions between a competitive business equals business orientation versus a relationship organizational culture. And then innovation can either come from inside or outside the company. That's number 3. Number 4, should companies establish large firms, or should they have lots of spin-offs and startups? Then 5, should a company focus on being on the leading edge of technology, or have a culture focused on market pull? Then finally, as explored in the Home Depot case, should the focus be on entrepreneurial skills or technical skills? So my conclusions are that what worked yesterday may not necessarily work today. And as demonstrated by Apple, a company must know what it is to determine its culture. And Steve Jobs, he figured that out. It remains to be seen if Tim Cook will continue that legacy. Now, as demonstrated by JCPenney, what works for one company may not work for another. And anytime you try to change an existing culture, you're bound to be met by opposition from both inside and outside the company. The bottom line is that if your culture fails, the company fails. And that's it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Here are my sources, and I hope you enjoyed it.